And welcome. I've adjusted the settings on my mic a little bit. I noticed that as I increased its reception volume, so I started pulling my voice further away, it got kind of echoey, and I didn't really like that. So if it's not great, I'm going to keep adjusting, keep seeing what would be best. Chapter 12. The promise of a smooth career, which my first calm introduction to Thornfield Hall seemed to pledge, was not belied on a longer acquaintance with the place and in its inmates. Mrs. Fairfax turned out to be what she had appeared, a placid-tempered, kind-natured woman of competent education and average intelligence. My pupil was a lively child who had been spoilt and indulged, and therefore was sometimes wayward, but she was committed entirely to my care, and no injudicious interference from any quarter ever thwarted my plans for her improvement. She soon forgot her little freaks, and became obedient and teachable. She had no great talents, no marked traits of character, no peculiar development of feeling or taste which raised her 1 inch above the ordinary level of childhood, but neither had she any deficiency or vice which sunk her below it. She made reasonable progress, entertained me for a vivacious, though perhaps not very profound, affection, and by her simplicity, gay prattle, and efforts to please, inspired me in return with a degree of attachment sufficient to make us both content in each other's society. This, par parentheses, will be thought cool language by persons who entertain solemn doctrines about the angelic nature of children, and the duty of those charged with their education to conceive for them an idolatrous devotion. But I am not writing to flatter parental egotism, to echo cant, or prop up humbug. I am merely telling the truth. I felt a conscientious solicitude for Adele's welfare and progress, and a quiet liking for her little self, just as I cherished towards Mrs. Fairfax a thankfulness for her kindness, and a pleasure in her society proportionate to the tranquil regard she had for me, and the moderation of her kind mind and character. Anybody may blame me who likes, when I add further that now and then, when I took a walk by myself in the grounds, when I went down to the gates and looked through them along the road, or when, while Adele played with her nurse, and Mrs. Fairfax made jellies in the storeroom, I climbed the 3 staircases, raised the trap-door of the attic, and having reached the leads, looked out afar over sequestered field and hill, and along dim skyline, that then I longed for a power of vision which might overpass that limit, which might reach the busy world, towns, regions full of life, I had heard of but never seen, that then I desired more of practical experience than I possessed, more of intercourse with my kind, of acquaintance with variety of character, than was here within my reach. I valued what was good in Mrs. Fairfax, and what was good in Adele, but I believed in the existence of other and more vivid kinds of goodness, and what I believed in I wished to behold. Who blames me? Many, no doubt, and I shall be called discontented. I could not help it. The restlessness was in my nature. It agitated me to pain sometimes. Then my sole relief was to walk along the corridor of the 3rd story, backwards and forwards, safe in the silence and solitude of the spot, and allow my mind's eye to dwell on whatever bright visions rose before it. And certainly they were many and glowing, to let my heart be heaved by the exalted movement, which, while it swelled it in trouble, expanded it with life, and, best of all, to open my inward ear to a tale that was never ended, a tale my imagination created and narrated continuously, quickened with all of infidence, life, fire, feeling that I desired and had not in my actual experience. It is in vain to say human beings ought to be satisfied with tranquillity. They must have action, and they will make sure if they do not find it. Millions are condemned to stiller doom than mine, and millions are still silent in revolt against their lot. Nobody knows how many rebellions besides political rebellions ferment in the masses of life which people earth. Women are supposed to be very calm generally, but women feel just as men feel. They need exercise for their faculties and a field for their efforts, as much as their brothers do. They suffer too from rigid a restraint, too absolute a stagnation, precisely as men would suffer, and it is narrow-minded in their more privileged fellow creatures to say that they ought to confine themselves to making puddings and knitting stockings, to playing on the piano and embroidering rugs. It is thoughtless to condemn them or laugh at them. It is thoughtless to condemn them if they seek to do more or learn more than custom has pronounced necessary for their sex. When thus alone, I not unfrequently heard Grace Poole's laugh. The same peal, the same low, slow which, when first heard, had thrilled me. I heard too her eccentric murmurs, stranger than her laugh. There were days when she was quite silent, but there were others when I could not account for the sound she made. Sometimes I saw her. She would come out of her room with a basin or a plate or tray in hand, go down to the kitchen, and shortly return, generally. Oh, romantic reader, forgive me for telling the plain truth, bearing a pot of porter. Her appearance always acted as a damper to the curiosity raised by her oral oddities. Hard-featured and staid, she had no point to which interest could catch. I made some attempts to draw her into conversation, but she seemed a person of few words. A monosyllabic reply usually cut short every effort of that sort. The other members of the household, John and his wife, Leah and the housemaid, and Sophie, the French nurse, were decent people, but in no respect remarkable. With Sophie I used to talk French, and sometimes I asked her questions about her native country, but she was not a descriptive or narrative turn, and generally gave such vapid and confused answers as were calculated rather to check than encourage inquiry. October, November, December passed away. One afternoon in January, Mrs. Fairfax had begged a holiday for Adele because she had a cold, and as Adele seconded the request with an ardour that reminded me how precious occasional holidays had been to me in my own childhood, I accorded it, deeming that I did well in showing pliability on the point. It was a fine, calm day, though very cold. I was tired of sitting still in the library through the whole long morning. Mrs. Fairfax had just written a letter, which was waiting to be posted, so I put on my bonnet and cloak and volunteered to carry it to Hay. The distance, 2 miles, would be a pleasant winter afternoon walk. Having seen Adele comfortably seated in her little chair by Mrs. Fairfax's parlour fireside, and given her her best wax doll, which I usually kept enveloped in a silver paper in a drawer, to play with, and a story-book for change of amusement, and having replied to her, "Revenez, Benoit, ma bonne amie, mes chères mademoiselle, Jeannette," with a kiss, I set out. The ground was hard, the air was still, my road was lonely. I walked fast till I got warm, and then I walked slowly to enjoy and analyse the species of pleasure brooding for me in the hour and situation. It was 3 o'clock. The church bell tolled as I passed under the belfry. The charm of the hour lay in its approaching dimness, in the low gliding and pale beaming sun. I was a mile from Thornfield, in a lane noted for wild roses in summer, for nuts and blackberries in autumn, and even now possessing a few coral treasures in hips and haws, but whose best winter delight lay in its utter solitude and leafless repose. If a breath of air stirred, it made no sound here, for there was not a holly, not an evergreen to rustle, and the stripped hawthorn and hazel bushes were as still as the white, worn stones which causewayed the middle of the path. Far and wide, on each side, there were only fields, where no cattle now browsed, and the little brown birds which stirred occasionally on the hedge looked like single russet leaves that had forgotten to drop. This lane inclined uphill all the way to Hay. Having reached the middle, I sat down on a stile which led thence into a field. Gathering my mantle about me and sheltering my hands in my muff, I did not feel the cold, though it froze keenly, as was attested by a sheet of ice covering the causeway, where a little brooklet, now congealed, had overflowed after a rapid thaw some days since. From my seat I could look down on Thornfield. The grey and battlemented hall was the principal object in the vale below me. Its woods and dark rookery rose against the west. I lingered till the sun went down amongst the trees and sank crimson and clear behind them. I then turned eastward. On the hilltop above me sat the rising moon, pale yet as a cloud, but brightening momentarily. She looked over Hay, which, half lost in trees, sent up a blue smoke from its few chimneys. It was yet a mile distant, but in the absolute hush I could hear it plainly, its thin murmurs of life. My ear, too, felt the flow of currents, in what dales and depths I could not tell, but there were many hills beyond Hay, and doubtless many becks threading their passes. That evening calm betrayed alike the tinkle of the nearest streams, the sough of the most remote. A rude noise broke on these fine ripplings and whisperings at once, so far away and so clear, a positive trump-trump, a metallic clatter, which effaced the soft wave wanderings, as in a picture the solid mass of crag, or the rough boughs of great oak, drawn in dark and strong on the foreground, efface the aerial distance of azure hill, sunny horizon, and blended clouds where the tint melts into tint. The din was on the causeway. A horse was coming. The windings of the lane yet hid it, but it approached. I was just leaving the stile, yet as the path was narrowed, I sat still to let it go by. In those days I was young, and all sorts of fancies bright and dark tenanted my mind. The memories of nursery stories were amongst other rubbish, and when they recurred, maturing youth added to them a vigour and vividness beyond what childhood could give. As this horse approached, and as I watched for it to appear through the dusk, I remembered certain of Bessie's tales, wherein figured a North England spirit called a Jye Trash, which, in the form of a horse, mule, or lodge dog, haunted solitary ways, and sometimes came upon belated travellers, as this horse was now coming upon me. It was very near, but not yet in sight, when, in addition to the tramp-tramp, I heard a rush under the hedge, and close down by the hazel stems glided a great dog, whose black and white colour made him a distinct object against the trees. It was exactly one form of Bessie's Guy Trash, a lion-like creature with long hair and a huge head. It passed me, however, quietly enough, not staying to look up, with strange canine eyes in my face, as I half expected it would. The horse followed, a tall steed, and on its back a rider. The man, a human being, broke the spell at once. Nothing ever rode the Guy Trash. It was always alone, and goblins, to my notions, though they might tenant the dumb carcasses of beasts, could scarce covet shelter in the commonplace human form. No Guy Trash was this, only a traveller taking the short cut to Millcote. He passed, and I went on. A few steps, and I turned. A sliding sound, and an exclamation of "What the deuce is to do now?" and a clattering tumble arrested my attention. Man and horse were down. They had slipped on the sheet of ice which glazed the causeway. The dog came bounding back, and seeing his master in a predicament, and hearing the horse groan, barked till the evening hills echoed with sound, which was deep in proportion to his magnitude. He snuffed round the prostrate group, and then he ran up to me. It was all he could do. There was no other help to hand to summon. I obeyed him, and walked down to the traveller. By this time, struggling himself free of his steed, his efforts were so vigorous, I thought he could not be hurt much. But I asked him the question. "Are you injured, sir?" I think he was swearing, but I'm not certain. However, he was pronouncing some formula which prevented him from replying to me directly. "Can I do anything?" I asked again. "You must just stand on one side," he answered as he rose, first to his knees and then to his feet. I did, whereupon began a heaving, stamping, clattering process, accompanied by a barking and baying which removed me effectually some yards' distance, but I would not be driven quite away till I saw the event. This was finally fortunate. The horse was re-established, and the dog was silenced with, "Down, Pilot!" The traveller now, stooping, felt his foot and leg, as if trying whether they were sound. Apparently something ailed them, for he halted to the stile whence I had just risen, and sat down. I was in the mood for being useful, or at least officious, I think, for I now drew near to him. "If you are hurt and want help, sir, I can fetch someone either from Thornfield Hall or from Hay." "Thank you. I shall do. I have no broken bones, only a sprain." And again he stood up and tried his foot, but the result extorted an involuntary "Ugh!" Something of daylight still lingered, and the moon was waxing bright. I could see him plainly. His figure was developed in a riding cloak, fur-collared and steel-clasped. Its details were not apparent, but I traced the general points of middle height and considerable breadth of chest. He had a dark face, with stern features and a heavy brow. His eyes and gathered eyebrows looked ireful and thwarted just now. He was past youth, but had not reached middle age. Perhaps he might be 35. I felt no fear of him, and but little shyness. Had he been a handsome, heroic-looking young gentleman, I should not have dared to stand thus questioning him against his will and offering my services unasked. I had hardly ever seen a handsome youth, never in my life spoken to one. I had a theoretical reverence and homage for beauty, elegance, gallantry, fascination. But had I met those qualities incarnate in masculine shape, I should have known instinctively that they never could, nor could have sympathy with anything in me, and should have shunned them at once would be fire, lightning, or anything else that is bright but antipathetic. If even this stranger had smiled and been good-humoured to me when I addressed him, if he had put off my offer of assistance gaily and with thanks, I should have gone on my way and not felt any vocation to renew inquiries. But the frown, the roughness of the traveller set me at my ease. I retained my station when he waved me to go and announced, "I cannot think of leaving you here, sir, at so late an hour, in this solitary lane, till I see you are fit to mount your horse." He looked at me when I said this. He had hardly turned his eyes in my direction before. "I should think you ought to be home yourself," said he, "if you have a home in this neighbourhood. Where do you come from?" "From just below. I am not at all afraid of being out late when it is moonlight. I will run over to Hay for you with pleasure, if you wish. Indeed, I am going there to post a letter." "You live just below? Do you mean that house with the battlements?" Pointed the Thornfield Hall, on which the moon cast a hoary gleam, bringing it out distinct and pale from the woods that, by contrast with the western sky, now seemed one mass of shadow. "Yes, sir." "Whose house is it?" "Mr. Rochester's." "Do you know Mr. Rochester?" "No, I have never seen him." "He is not residence, then?" "No." "Can you tell me where he is?" "I cannot." "You are not a servant of the Hall, of course?" You are... He stopped, ran his eye over my dress, which, as usual, was quite simple. A black merino cloak, a black beaver bonnet, neither of them half fine enough for a lady's maid. He seemed puzzled to decide what I was. I helped him. I am the governess. Ah, the governess, he repeated. Deuce take me, if I had not forgotten, the governess. And again my raiment underwent scrutiny. In 2 minutes he rose from the stile. His face expressed pain when he tried to move. I cannot commission you to fetch help, he said, but you may help me a little yourself, if you will be so kind. Yes, sir. You have not an umbrella that I can use as a stick? No. Try to get a hold of my horse's bridle and lead him to me. You are not afraid? I should have been afraid to touch a horse when alone, but when told to do it, I was disposed to obey. I put down my muff on the stile and went up to the tall steed. I endeavoured to catch the bridle, but it was a spirited thing, and would not let me come near its head. I made an effort on effort, though in vain. Meantime, I was mortally afraid of its trampling forefeet. The traveller waited and watched for some time, and at last he laughed. I see, he said. The mountain will never be brought to Mahomet, so all you can do is aid Mahomet to go to the mountain. I must beg of you to come here. I came. Excuse me, he continued. Necessity compels me to make you useful. He laid a heavy hand on my shoulder, and leaning on me with some stress, limped to his horse. Having once caught the bridle, he mastered it directly, and sprang to his saddle, grimacing grimly as he made the effort, for it wrenched his sprain. Now, said he, releasing his under lip from a hard bite, just hand me my whip. It lies there under the hedge. I sought it and found it. Thank you. Now make haste with the letter to Hay, and return as fast as you can. A touch of a spurred heel made this horse first start and rear, and then bounded away. The dog rushed into his traces, and all three vanished. Like heath that in the wilderness the wild wind whirls away. I took up my muff and walked on. The incident had occurred and was gone for me. It was an incident of no moment, no romance, no interest in a sense, yet it marked with change one single hour of a monotonous life. My help had been needed and claimed. My help, I had given it. I was pleased to have done something, trivial, transitory though the deed was. It was an active thing, and I was weary of its existence, all passive. The new face, too, was like a new picture introduced to the gallery of memory, and it was dissimilar to all the others hanging there. Firstly, because it was masculine, and secondly, because it was dark, strong, and stern. I had still before me when I entered Hay, and slipped the letter into the post office. I saw it as I walked fast downhill all the way home. When I came to the stile, I stopped a minute, looked round, and listened, with an idea that a horse's hoofs might ring on the causeway again, and that a rider in a cloak and a guy-trash-like Newfoundland dog might be again transparent. I saw only the hedge and a pillared window before me, rising up still and straight to meet the moonbeams. I heard only the faintest waft of wind roaming fitful among the trees round Thornfield, a mile distant, and when I glanced down in the direction of the murmur, my eye, traversing the hall front, caught a light kindling in a window. It reminded me that I was late, and I hurried on. I did not like re-entering Thornfield. To pass its threshold was to return to stagnation, to cross the silent hall, to ascend the darksome staircase, to seek my own little lonely room, and then to meet tranquil Mrs. Fairfax, and spend the long winter evening with her, and her only, was the while wholly the faint excitement wakened by my walk. To slip again over my faculties the viewless fetters of a uniform into still existence, of an existence whose very privileges of security and ease I was becoming incapable of appreciating. What good it would have done me at that time to have been tossed into the storms of an uncertain, struggling life, and to have been taught by rough and bitter experience to long for the calm amidst which I now repined. Yes, just as much good as it would do a man tired of sitting still in a too-easy chair to take a long walk, and just as natural was the wish to stir, under my circumstances, it would be under his. I lingered at the gates. I lingered on the lawn. I paced backwards and forwards on the pavement. The shutters of the glass door were closed. I could not see into the interior, and both my eyes and spirit seemed drawn from the gloomy house, from the grey hollow filled with rayless cells, as it appeared to me, to the sky expanded before me, a blue sea absolved from taint of cloud, the moon ascending it in solemn march, her orb seeming to look up as if she led the hilltops, from behind which she had come, far and farther below her, and aspired to the zenith, midnight dark in its fathomless depth and measureless distance, and for those trembling stars that followed her course, they made my heart tremble, my veins glow, and when I viewed them, little things call us to earth. The clock struck in the hall. That sufficed. I turned from moon and stars, opened the side door, and went in. The hall was not dark, nor yet was it lit. Only by the high-hung bronze lamp a warm glow sufficed both it and the lower steps of the oak staircase. This reddish shine issued from the great dining-room, whose two-leaved door stood open, and showed a genial fire in the grate, glancing on marble hearth and brass fire-irons, and revealing purple draperies and polished furniture in most pleasant radiance. It revealed, too, a group near the mantelpiece. I had scarcely caught it, and scarcely become aware of a cheerful mingling voices, amongst which I seemed to distinguish the tones of Adele, when the door closed. I hastened to Mrs. Fairfax's room. There was a fire there too, but no candle, and no Mrs. Fairfax. Instead, all alone, sitting upright on the rug, and gazing with the gravity at the blaze, I beheld a great black and white long-haired dog, just like the Gytrash of the lane. It was so like it that I went forward and said, "Pilot," and the thing got up and came to me and snuffed me. I caressed him, and he wagged his great tail, but he looked an eerie creature to be alone with, and I could not tell whence he had come. I rang the bell, for I wanted a candle, and I wanted, too, to get an account of this visitant. Leah entered. "What dog is this?" "He come with the master." "With whom?" "With master, Mr. Rochester. He's just arrived." "Indeed. And is Mrs. Fairfax with him?" "Yes, and Mr. Dill. They're in the dining-room, and John has gone for surgeon, for master has had an accident. His horse fell and his ankle is sprained." "Did the horse fall in Hay Lane?" "Yes, coming downhill. It slipped on some ice." "Ah. Bring me a candle, will you, Leah?" Leah brought it. She entered, followed by Mrs. Fairfax, who repeated the news, adding that Mr. Carter, the surgeon, was come, and was now with Mr. Rochester. Then she hurried out to give orders about tea, and I went upstairs to take off my things. That was chapter 12. Oh my goodness, the drama, the drama. Did you catch it? If this is your first time, did you catch what happened? Maybe. I'll see you next time with chapter 13.